A bucket tipped, and dark coffee spread across the marble floor like spilled ink. For a moment, the entire lobby froze. Even the air seemed to pause. At the center of it all stood a man in a tailored navy suit, clean lines, gold cufflinks, an expression carved from stone. Victor Langston. He looked down at the puddle as if it were an insult, and kneeling before him, mopping the floor, was the janitor. A black man in his early 50s, shoulders stooped but hands steady. His badge read E. Daniels. The CEO's voice cut through the silence. "Is this what passes for work around here?" No response. Only the soft scrape of a mop against marble. Victor's tone hardened. "I said, look at me." Daniels raised his head. His eyes were calm, too calm, and that seemed to irritate the man towering over him. "You people," Victor muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear, always doing the bare minimum. Two receptionists at the front desk exchanged uneasy glances. A security guard shifted his stance but said nothing. Victor gestured at the floor again. "Do it again. And this time, try not to embarrass the company." Daniels wrung out the mop and went back to work. The fabric hissed against the tiles, collecting what was left of the spill. Victor stepped closer. "Unbelievable. I run a billion-dollar corporation, and this is who they send me to clean my building." He grabbed a coffee cup from a nearby table, half full, still warm, and poured it over the freshly cleaned floor. "Now clean that too." Gasps rippled through the lobby. Daniels stopped. He looked at the spreading stain, then at Victor. Still, no anger. No protest. Just a long, quiet breath. He took the mop again. But this time, his hands moved slower. More deliberate. Victor sneered. "Maybe I should hire someone who actually wants a job. Someone who doesn't spend the day staring at the floor like a lost child." The janitor's voice came low. "Maybe someone who doesn't mistake kindness for weakness." It was quiet, but it cut through the air like a blade. Victor's expression hardened. "What did you just say?" "I said," Daniels replied, still cleaning, "I'll be done soon." Victor laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. "No, you won't. Because you're done now." He turned toward the front desk. "Security, escort him out. I don't ever want to see him in this building again." The security guard hesitated. "Sir, he's been here for—" "I said now." Daniels set the mop against the wall. He wiped his hands on his uniform, nodded once to the guard, and picked up his small cleaning cart. No anger. No tears. Just silence, the kind that unsettles everyone watching. As he walked toward the exit, Victor called out one last time. "Next time you want to act like you matter, remember where you stand." The janitor stopped briefly at the door. He didn't turn around. He just said, "I do." Then he walked out. The doors closed behind him, heavy, final. Victor exhaled sharply, straightened his tie, and faced his team. "Let's get back to work." But the room didn't move. No one said a word. Because even before the day was over, they all knew something about that man wasn't ordinary. And by nightfall, the name E. Daniels would appear on every screen in the country, under headlines that made the powerful choke on their own pride. The next morning, the city was painted in quiet arrogance. Sunlight crawled across the skyline, touching the glass towers that men like Victor Langston built to mirror their own reflection. Inside his penthouse, he sat before 3 screens, drinking silence with his coffee. The world outside was predictable: markets, profits, control. Until one headline shattered the rhythm. Federal operation exposes fraud at Langston Global Holdings. The words didn't register at first. They felt too distant, too abstract, the kind of scandal that happened to other men. Then came the photo. A single still frame from his lobby's security footage. The janitor. The man he had fired, humiliated, dismissed with a smile. Victor's breath stalled. The caption beneath the image was small, but devastating. Undercover federal operative linked to Justice Department sting. The cup slipped from his hand. Dark coffee spread across the white marble, seeping into the cracks. The same marble he once ordered someone else to clean. By noon, the entire boardroom was a battlefield of whispers. Executives stared at screens, reading the same article over and over. as if repetition could change the ending. Langston Global, the empire Victor built on intimidation, was now the subject of a federal probe. The evidence was overwhelming: hidden accounts, offshore transfers, falsified audits. And somewhere within that storm of legal language was one devastating sentence: information obtained through deep-cover surveillance conducted by federal agent embedded as maintenance staff. No one said his name, but everyone remembered his face: quiet, patient, invisible. The man they ignored for a year had been watching them the entire time. Victor's office felt smaller now. The skyline that once bowed to him was indifferent. He stood before the window, staring down at the street below. Cars moved like ants. People came and went. And somewhere among them was the man he had tried to erase. He replayed the moment, the spill, the laughter, the firing. But this time, he wasn't the center of power. He was the evidence. The humiliation he'd thrown so casually had come back, sharpened, deliberate. Justice didn't always scream. Sometimes, it arrived dressed as irony. That evening, Victor looked into the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. His reflection had always been part of his identity. Tailored, confident, in control. But beneath the expensive fabric was something raw, unfamiliar: fear. It wasn't the kind born of losing wealth. It was the fear of being seen for what he really was. A man who built success on the silence of others. Now that silence had spoken. The television filled the penthouse with light. The reporter's voice was steady, detached, merciless. The undercover agent who exposed Langston Global's corruption is expected to testify before Congress this week. No emotion. No theatrics. Just truth, delivered in the same calm tone Victor once used to dismiss the people beneath him. The screen showed the agent for the first time. The same man who once scrubbed his floor, now walking through a corridor lined with flags and cameras. There was no anger in the man's expression. Only purpose. Measured. Controlled. The kind of strength Victor had never understood. By nightfall, Victor's name had become a headline. Not of success, but disgrace. Bank accounts frozen. Board members resigning. Investors fleeing. The empire he ruled through fear had turned inward. Every man who once laughed at his cruelty was now silent. The same silence he once demanded from others. And for the first time in his life, Victor Langston felt what silence really meant. It wasn't control. It was consequence. The morning light felt different now. It wasn't gentle. It was exposing. It moved through the blinds like interrogation beams, cutting through the silence that filled his penthouse. Victor hadn't slept. The night had been long. Phone calls unanswered, messages deleted, lawyers unavailable. He tried to convince himself it was all temporary, just bad press, just noise. But somewhere between the third drink and the fifth headline, denial had turned to dread. His empire was unraveling, not with fire, but with precision. Every document, every account, every decision he'd buried beneath arrogance was surfacing, one after another, like bones in thawing ground. The phone rang again. He didn't answer. He already knew what it was, the sound of a collapsing world trying to call him back. Justice rarely arrives when it's convenient. It waits, patient, observant, until silence itself becomes unbearable. Black SUVs line the street. Federal agents step out, emotionless, efficient. The building stood like a monument to power, cold, metallic, self-assured. Inside, the same lobby that once reflected Victor's confidence now reflected fear. Employees whispered. Phones were confiscated. The marble floor gleamed as always, but this time, its reflection told a different story. It no longer showed status. It showed accountability. Victor arrived late, dark glasses, trembling hands, pretending composure. But even his shadow betrayed him. It trembled slightly, as if the light no longer respected him. Federal agents waited near the reception desk. The same desk where he'd humiliated a man for being too slow. The difference between dominance and disgrace is timing. And timing had finally caught up with him. Every sound felt louder now. The click of shoes, the hum of lights, the whisper of paper. He could feel eyes on his back, the same eyes that once looked away when he mocked others. Power had always made him tall. Now guilt made him small. When they entered the boardroom, it was empty except for a single folder on the table, stamped evidence. Victor stared at it, unblinking. Inside that folder was his legacy, condensed to numbers, signatures, and lies. For years, he thought fear kept the world in order. But fear doesn't preserve, it decays. It rots slowly beneath the surface, until one day the floor collapses under its own weight. Former Langston Global CO under federal investigation. Sources confirmed direct ties to embezzlement and fraud uncovered by an undercover federal agent. Across offices, cafes, and homes, people paused. The name Victor Langston, once spoken with admiration, was now a synonym for corruption. In the lower corner of the screen, a small photo appeared, the janitor. Agent Daniel Cross. The same man who stood silent while Victor shouted. The same man who cleaned the floor after being insulted. The same man who walked away in the rain without a word. Now the world finally saw him for who he was, not a servant, but a sentinel. Power mocks humility because it mistakes it for weakness. But humility has a weapon arrogance will never understand: endurance. For the first time, Victor Langston had nothing to say. Every word he'd ever used as a weapon, cut, command, manipulate, was useless here. Truth didn't need volume. It only needed evidence. Documents were placed before him. Bank trails, email threads, signed authorizations. Each page was a reflection of his greed, printed in black and white. He tried to deny, to explain, to negotiate. But justice doesn't bargain. It listens, records, and waits. Across from him, the lead investigator spoke in a voice that was calm, almost kind. You built a company on fear, Mr. Langston. But fear doesn't protect. It exposes. Victor said nothing, because he knew the man was right. The walk from the building to the police car was less than 50 feet. But for Victor, it felt endless, each step an echo of his own arrogance returning to haunt him. He didn't resist, didn't look back. The crowd watched in silence, the same silence he'd once demanded. As the car door closed, thunder rolled. The city exhaled. There are no grand speeches at the end of injustice. No applause. No redemption. Only the quiet correction of a balance long disturbed. Time moved differently here. Hours felt like confessions. Every sound, the closing of doors, the clank of keys, became a reminder of what power cannot buy back: respect. Victor sat on the lower bunk, staring at his hands. They looked older now, not from age but from consequence. In the silence, fragments of his past replayed. The laughter, the mockery, the sound of a bucket tipping over. And the voice, calm, respectful, saying, "Yes, sir. I'll handle it." Now he understood what that tone really meant. It wasn't submission. It was restraint. The kind that comes from knowing truth doesn't need to shout. He didn't mention Victor's name. He didn't seek revenge or recognition. He simply spoke of the system, how corruption hides in civility, how injustice wears tailored suits, how the people who think they run the world often forget they're being watched by it. The audience listened, silent, respectful. Not out of fear, out of understanding. Revenge destroys. Justice restores. And the quiet kind lasts longer. Months later, the company was reborn under a new name, new leadership, new ethics policy. But the marble still held memory, a faint echo of a moment that changed everything. Injustice had lived there once. So had arrogance. But so did truth, patient, quiet, undefeated. The janitor never returned. He didn't need to. His work was done. Arrogance believes power protects it. But power built on disrespect will always collapse under its own reflection. In the end, justice doesn't shout, it arrives. And when it does, even the mighty learn how small they really are. Power without empathy collapses, always. If this story struck a nerve, make sure you subscribe to Hidden Tales Stories for more true-to-life stories where justice doesn't scream, it whispers. Tell me in the comments, what lesson do you think this story teaches about respect and judgment?